Welcome everyone to this episode of Digital Transformation Bite Size. This is a series where I interview leading lights and thought-leading experts in the digital transformation, intelligent automation, and data analytics space. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be able to invite Chris to talk to us. Chris, would you mind giving us a quick introduction as to who you are and what do you do, sir, please?
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Kieran. Great to be here. My name's Chris Gayner. I'm the Director of Strategy and Innovation for SYKES Digital Services. We are the digital arm of SYKES Enterprises.
Oh, fantastic. And what's a normal day look like for you, Chris, or is there such a thing in the digital transformation space?
Good question. A bit of background on my role might help answer that. My role typically lives somewhere in the gray space between delivery, IT, sales, solutions, marketing, and the board. So any day I could be working on part of the strategic direction, either setting or execution. Could be on a large complex program, whether it's emerging tech or just a new and interesting area. Or it's basically looking at how do we work with partners, our existing capabilities, both within SDS and within SYKES, to bring new solutions and propositions to the market. So pretty varied, I would answer that. Yeah, no 2 days are the same. And as you say, anything that has got the word digital on it these days is hot, and everyone's very busy. So yeah, quite a varied view on where we get involved with clients, partners, and our mothership. So yeah, lots to go on.
Gosh, I wonder if that's why we're in the digital transformation space, because it's so varied. What excites you about the digital transformation space, Chris?
Well, where to start? Perhaps it's the raw sex appeal synonymous with deep process engineering, or it's being able to gratuitously say digital transformation in every conversation that's humanly possible. But seriously, I mean, for me, digital transformation, I'll just throw it out there. It's one of those throwaway terms that just has so many meanings to so many people, depending on the context, depending on the moon cycle, depending on everything that it's used. It's almost unhelpful. It covers everything from a website hooked up to a CRM, right down to the other side, which is an automated fulfillment center, leveraging IoT technology supported by AI, delivered via a complex array of cloud and microservices, quantum computing, blockchain, space. You get it. It's so big, it doesn't mean much. Equally, then you look at AI, intelligent automation, same thing. It gets everyone really excited and it's fun to talk about. When you start going down to the next level, it's just really complex and really nebulous. And so for me, really what excites me is being able to just drill down a little bit further into what that actually means. And so I have a real basic model in my mind that gets me out of bed every morning. Is I look at a customer experience transformation. So how does technology enable, drive better interactions for people, for customers? And then the other side of that is workplace transformation. How does technology drive job satisfaction? How does it enable us to do our jobs better, enable collaboration between agents, suppliers, and generally improve operational and financial performance of businesses? I think through those two lenses, that's when things start to get a little bit more exciting than the broad umbrella of digital transformation, because it starts to mean something then.
I think maybe for career-wise, that opens up a lot of opportunities there and all the things you're describing. But why are firms digitally transforming these days?
It's a good question, and I'm going to paint a story here for you, Kieran, so bear with me, but it highlights, I think, critical driver for the need. Think about that two-step model I had there, which was customer experience transformation, workplace transformation. Everyone has bought something, call it a phone, call it a game console, call it a VCR. You get it home, you open it up, you turn it on, and it doesn't work. So if that's not frustrating enough, what you have to do is you go to the manual that it came with, and it's so dang complex, if there's a manual there at all. So you're forced to go onto online anyway and find the information to basically help you figure this out. So you get there, you open up Google, you go to the manufacturer's website, you click on it, and then you spend the next 3 hours trying to find the make, the model, the moon cycle that the product is, and then eventually get to the support page, which is just buried down deep within the recesses of that website. You get there, and it's the same bloody instructions that came with the manual, with the product, sorry. So you open up a new tab, you go to the browser, you hit the discussion boards, you open up the latest forum on people trying to solve this, and they've got the same questions, but they've got no answers. So you go back to the card that came with the item, you dial in the contact center. 4 days later, 45 minutes into that journey, you start talking to a human, and let's call that person Jack. Jack then interrogates you for the next hour, starting right back where you began your journey 4 days ago. What brand is it? What model is it? What are you wearing? All that sort of stuff. And then finally, after 45 minutes, Jack comes back to you and says, oh, do you know what? I'm going to have to refer you to kind of our product expert team because I don't know the answer. You then hit Jill. Jill is the product expert. She starts off the same place Jack did. She's asking you to confirm your identity, your social security number, your waist size, and then finally the issue you're having. Jill then puts you on hold for the next 30 minutes as she scours off through her knowledge base, and she's asking clients and colleagues and team leads. She comes back to you 15 minutes later, and she basically says, "Listen, I need to go dig into this matter further." So at this point, you just kind of pause there and you say, "Listen, thank you very much for your time. Sorry I inconvenienced you. I'll just go figure this out myself." And then you get off the phone, you pick up that sweet new VCR, and then you throw it across the room, and you turn on Netflix because it's 2021. But I think the point there is that journey in itself. It's a journey that's been there for 20 years, and it's everyone talks about, well, we need to improve that. We need to introduce technology and new processes. But fundamentally, we're at a point now where actually we can start to introduce new tech, new processes, new ways of working to enable that journey to operate a hell of a lot better. So I think for me, this is where tools like automation, like data, like cloud, all of these things, again, start to mean something in the context of that example. So if you think about that customer experience perspective, things like design thinking, being able to map out that customer journey, being able to take that example I gave you and highlight exactly where those sticking points were, where those really painful moments are, and then also bringing in some of that data, whether we're looking at voice calls or web activity, we can start to get real granular with the click stream, the process stream, the telemetry data that brings a story of its own to life. Bringing those two together is where we start our journey and say, do you know what? Perhaps the process needs to be engineered. Perhaps 15 verification steps as we go through the company is not the right thing to do. Maybe we could bring in some biometrics. We look at then how data is used throughout the whole process. Should we introduce chat functionality on the website hooked up to an intelligent IVR? So before the customer even gets the contact center, we've got a whole history there. We've got a whole bunch of behavioral information that the agent can pick up, read in 5 minutes, and then get to that diagnostic and that resolution stages faster. And then finally, perhaps there's some technology, again, at each of these points here that we could use, such as an app or a web page that has been optimized to appear higher up than the sales page, because our goal here is actually we want to get rid of that call from the call center completely, and we want to get that person at their time of need. I think then the other side of that is the workplace side. So once you've got that customer journey map and you've figured out what happens with the customer going into the center, you can then look at, well, what's the agent doing in the center? Why aren't they well equipped to handle those conversations? And so we could bring things in like digital assistants to interrogate knowledge bases in the background while the customer's having a conversation. Perhaps the agents aren't well equipped technically. Could we use RPA? Could we use digital assistants, unified desktops, a single pane of glass to speed up the entire conversation and data gathering process? Again, so the agent can focus on the interaction with the customer. Or perhaps there's a whole bunch of data happening across the organization, across all the agents, and we can take the best performance and we can start to benchmark the underperformers against them using precision coaching and automated learning tools. My point here is there's a whole bunch of things that suddenly become real and move way beyond science fiction or even 5 years ago what the contact center or even customer experience meant. And I actually think it's the world's coming together now on digital transformation suddenly means customer and workplace coming together. And we're getting all these new interesting tools coming up and ways to think about how we want to solve that problem. I think critically it starts with the customer, and it's always been about the customer. Now we've got a whole bunch of technology that allows us to actually do something about that.
Where do you see the digital transformation industry going?
It's a good question. Again, I do use my two pillar of CX and workplace transformation. It is interesting. So that whole example I gave you there, it is becoming more and more real as you've got platform players entering the space now. We used to have big contact centers owned by hardware providers. Now we've got companies like Amazon coming in to eat their lunch. Let's call this the Netflix effect, where they've got a completely different outlook. They've built their businesses completely different. The technologies they've got are incredible. They're coming in now and saying, hey, do you really want that big clunky thing over there? Or do you want this new thing over here? So there is obviously limitations there. So we've got regulatory compliance, GDPR, data issues. That stuff is being worked out along with all the discussions around AI, around all the discussions about how we become greater owners of our data and what companies do with our data. But fundamentally, this concept, again, from a customer experience perspective, where you've got this kind of CX as a service, I mean, this is an incredible game changer for everyone. You've got all the bells and whistles, all the access to AI. You've got all the infrastructure you need to run basically a contact center right through to a website in a box within Amazon. So I think where that direction is heading is I would cast my mind over to Phil First's One Office concept. I actually think we start to see that come to life a bit here, which is the idea of this spine that lives along the organization, and it enables us to touch customers, but equally start to pass work into the back office, middle office, and call that the workplace. And so I think one direction, where do I see it going? I see a lot more companies thinking about the platform game. COVID has been the absolute accelerator for cloud and anything cloud-based. So both front and back office organizations are thinking, do you know what? We've got all this legacy technology. We've got all this weight, this debt that we just need to think about harder. How do we make sure that we're designing our organization to not incur more debt, as everyone is distributed and all over the place now? And that starts with the customer piece, as I keep saying. So I think at the CX front, we've got AWS, we've got Microsoft, we've got all these guys now moving really heavily into this CX space, but they're doing it with a view on the back. So again, the as I mentioned, COVID didn't just change the way we as consumers bought and interacted with companies, changed the way we worked as well. So increased focus on business resilience, agility, motivation, and morale. People are everywhere now, and they're not operating the same way. So I think the CX piece starts to transform how businesses think about their back office. And then once you get to the back office, I actually see this a lot more investment into anything to do with cost and operational efficiency, obviously. So we're going to see, I think, RPA become sexy again. I think we saw it, we've been in this space now for 10 years. Where we're at now is you're actually almost following the same trajectory as the ERP market. We've had a go at it. We did some interesting projects. Some things started to take off and scale, some things not so. And now a lot of people are building their own teams. They're designing capability. I think what we're seeing now is this shift into the second phase, similar to the ERP, where everyone's looking at RPA and automation tools and saying, do we buy some capability to plug into our business? Do we buy some tools that come with it natively? Or actually, do we reorganize the process and do something completely different? And so the concept of RPA is a bit of a catalyst for what's happening in the back office, where people are asking themselves, how do we get more efficient? How do we drive costs down, especially in this post-COVID world? And then how do we bring that together with the customer experience piece? So again, it's the digital transformation piece for me is one eye on CX, but it has to have an impact on that workplace and that operational transformation in the back.
Oh, wow. You and I could be in violent agreement here on lots of things. I have to say, I absolutely love that idea of a platform. I think this is the one thing that's confused me for years, is that organizations have bought bits of tech and then they've bolted on and they've made their processes more specific for individual customers, believing that's the right way to go. And all I see over year after year after year is technology debt being built up in the form of change management debt. And when I look at why projects and programs fail, a lot of it is just that change management. It can't pay for itself. It can't be managed easily, and things break. And I love what Amazon, amongst others, are doing at the moment, which is literally putting it on in the cloud. And as someone once said to me, cloud is simply someone else's computer, and Amazon have built a really safe and secure environment, as have Azure and other people who've done this. And as you mentioned, I love that phrase you're using there, by the way, post-COVID world. It's very positive. It gets us out of the current mire or misery of where we're probably at in lots of instances. But it'll be interesting to see anybody working anywhere on any platform with any device, with companies building out contact centers with data and AI. And I'm the same. I think, I don't know whether I'd call robots sexy. You maybe just brightened up the lives of many RPA practitioners. But I definitely think it should become like ERP. You don't think about the system, you think about the outputs and what it does, and then where those fit in. Absolutely fantastic. But for organizations to get there, Chris, there's a lot of change involved. Can you have a minimal viable digital strategy or a minimal viable program to get yourself to be anywhere, any place, anytime for anyone?
I think the long and short, Kieran, to that answer is in my experience, no. I think you can do an MVP on a piece of tool to understand what it does, understand some of the functionality, understand when you plug it into this system over here, does it bring the whole thing down? MVP transformation, no such thing. Fundamentally, I think if anyone's looking at MVP for transformation, it means there's not a clear reason or vision for change. And so it typically starts and ends with the MVP. But equally, what it also usually means is there's lots of projects happening across a business, and someone can't quite get enough attention of the most senior people to say we need to put more money into this thing, so an MVP thus starts to come to life. Now, as I said, MVP for tech, yep, absolutely, check functionality, but again, not suggesting we need MVPs for RPA anymore, but emerging tech, new tech, where we don't know, or we need to take the organization on a journey to understand conceptually and technically what this thing does. But transformation project, no, I mean, a truly transformation project starts at the top and has tendrils into multiple facets of the business, spanning people, process, tech, strategy, data, has a clear vision, a roadmap on how to get there. It is an executive imperative. So what we tend to see when people talk about MVP or projects that have the MVP title, usually there's lots of pet projects running around at the edges of strategy, the edges of the business, the edges of technology. And the goal, typically people are trying to influence the overall vision and the overall strategy, but starting bottom up is really hard to do when we talk about transformation. There needs to be a really clear catalyst, a really clear executive initiative and imperative to do this. And then equally, we need to have a whole bunch of change that goes along with it. Change, as with every project, is one of the biggest single most important things for all these projects. So an MVP typically doesn't have much change management around it. So thus, it doesn't go much further than the MVP is my experience anyway, what I've seen.
So who should lead digital transformation? Because I laugh at the funny story that came out a while ago. Why do firms digitally transform this year? Is it that the IT department have suddenly come up with the answer? Is it that the CFO has come up with the answer, or the chief executive or board, or is it COVID? And I get the awful impression that COVID has driven lots of organizations to transform, but I don't think that should be the reason. So who should own digital transformation? Who's accountable?
That's a great question. It depends who you're asking, and classic consulting, right? Let's break it apart. So let's start with CX transformation first. Again, just because I'm a simpleton and I need basic frameworks to help me through this. CX transformation fundamentally is whoever is responsible for that CX moment. So in the contact center, we've got the contact center director who is managing calls once they come in. Further up or further next to that role has to be a product owner, has to be a marketing team, has to be a customer experience person. Ultimately, the chief executive owns the way those teams think and act around customer experience. However, the accountability is on, and the responsibility, sorry, is on those level of functional leaders to bring it to life. Now, in my example I gave you before, we had a customer, I gave you a contact center example, but it didn't start with a contact center, it started with a website. So you get into interesting discussions. Well, if we invested more of the marketing budget away from, say, pay-per-click advertising into sales and put some of that into service queries, for example, why won't my product work versus can I buy product X? Interestingly, we start to see the profit margins improve in the contact center. Not as many calls are going through the contact center. The calls that are coming through are maybe a little bit more qualified. We can speed up. So the contact center off the back of those calls will be more efficient, be less of them. And actually the cost of operating that contact center goes down. And so immediately we've got an interesting discussion here, which is, so if we tweak the front and how we think about that customer touch point, we fundamentally impact the back. To your question, who owns that? It can't be one person who owns that, right? There has to be a group of folk who say, the reason we want to invest in doing that is because there is an imperative in the back, call it the contact center, to improve NPS, to improve first call resolution, to improve all of those good metrics. But then we need to incentivize the marketing team to want to do that as well. So we get into interesting discussions here about metrics. Fundamentally, big overarching digital transformation projects that cover multiple silos in an organization are just so complex and so clunky that typically they don't run right across the business. And the reason is because we can't align all the metrics, we can't change all the operating models, we can't do all of that in one sitting without basically upturning a whole business to start again. And so within legacy businesses, what we need is an imperative from the C-suite, ideally CEO, that says this is why we need to change. Then we can get into, well, if it touches the customer, let's organize and prioritize that level of customer interaction. Who owns those pieces of interactions? And then we can start carve it up there. But as soon as it goes into, say, true back office, we're talking finance, HR, right through, we have to start slicing and dicing that program up. It's ambitious, it's great, it's multi-year. The big vendors out there love hearing this type of stuff. The reality is the change, the whole journey that we have to go through, it's just so big that actually it's better to compartmentalize it, at least within the context of, are we improving customer experience, or are we improving the workplace? And then we can start to put some owners on it. But I think metrics, clear imperative, and critically what the goal is, starts to highlight where the ownership of that transformation needs to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, isn't there? And I think it's not for the unbrave-hearted, as it were, or for the foolhardy either, but it needs foolhardy either. But it needs planned out. I was laughing when you were in the middle of that. I was giggling, and not because of your answer. Your answer is absolutely excellent. I love it. I have to say, I can just ask questions and then sit back and learn, which is why I love doing these talks. You mentioned the marketing team and the contact center and service. I'm an absolute advocate of providing great service. It keeps customers there. I sometimes see, though, that firms cut back on service, and then their customer starts to go. Then they put £1 million into pay-per-click adverts, and the customers come back and everyone celebrates. So it's just, I wish they would do the first, not the second.
But Chris, it's the misalignment. It's the metric alignment piece. Is marketing teams are typically aligned to revenue and not service, not operating costs. So it's do you muddy the water? Do you try to influence other teams with other teams' metrics? It gets really complicated when you do that, and it's interesting that it almost suggests, do you need a layer that runs through the middle that can help cut through that? I don't know the answer to this, by the way. There is no clear answer. It really is, well, our business is more heavily leaning towards the customer, and therefore all the metrics need to reflect that, or our business is more heavily leaning towards the operational side, and we need more metrics to push through there. But it's definitely not one answer for everyone. It is horses for courses. We need to look at that initiative, and that's, again, the only person who can set that, or at least stand up in front of people and say, this is what we're doing, is the CEO.
It's interesting that, because a lot of people would argue that, the customer has to be at the center of everything. But as you say, there is different organizations that do different things. I'm sure there's a customer somewhere. I wonder if we're putting an awful lot of pressure on the CEO. He or she, now I agree, ultimately the buck stops there and they have to be accountable. I've watched so many organizations, just departments, fail underneath the CEO. And when I say fail to communicate, fail to agree strategy. So ultimately, maybe in terms of digital transformation, you have what I would describe as a wartime leader and a peacetime leader. And a peacetime leader is someone who runs an organization and everything's nice and happy, and everybody gets an arm put around them and told they're wonderful. In wartime, someone has to make really dramatic decisions. And I've yet to see a leader that can be both. I don't know whether you'd agree or disagree with that, but I think definitely firm, and by that I don't mean horrible or horrendous or negative leadership, is required to drive a digital transformation program from end to end. I think great perseverance, a great expectation, and almost to a degree forcing everyone to communicate is essential.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And I cast my mind back to some other big programs I've seen, and it's the style is fit for the context, I guess. So typically we've seen most of the programs we see is direction set by CEO, and then the leaders step in. So the CIOs, COOs, CMOs, that C-suite steps in and has to figure this out. They own that responsibility and accountability. My point about style is there are only a couple of reasons why you would do transformation to begin with. One is your business is not doing so well, or you're losing ground to competitors, or something crazy like COVID comes out of the woodworks. These are all responsive, reactive transformation drivers, and they bring with it very different mentalities and very different approaches. And it is your wartime piece there, I guess, is we need to get through this. And this is where direction is less given and more told. It is you need to. Go to the other side, which is business is booming, and we know that to stay ahead, we need to tweak rather than fundamentally transform. It's interesting because you go into a company that's doing well and start talking about transformation, you'll either be laughed out the door because they're like, well, we're, arrogant companies will say, well, we're doing pretty well here, so come back later, or exploratory companies and very conscious companies will look at that and say, we need to know what's next, but perhaps let's not call it transformation. Let's call it evolution, or let's call it let's just call it that stepping stone to what we need to do next. So I think if you think about those two lenses, your wartime and your positive time. It's not a matter of negative or positive. It's just a completely different way to approach transformation. And again, if you come at it through your MVP, if the business is collapsing underneath you and your customers are leaving, your systems are incurring debt, your if you're public and your shareholders are giving you grief, coming up with a, hey, we've got a piece of robot that will automate this task over here, it's not going to go very far, right? So this is where we're connecting into that strategy and getting that ultra clear, this is what we need. And then the autonomous teams down the bottom, we hear, was it pizza size teams, and you buy pizza and it's enough for that team to solve that problem. Perfect, right? You can get young, ambitious, or just ambitious people attacking these problems, and they can do that autonomously so long as that direction is set. We don't need a robot to do this, or we don't need a website to do this. What we need is an app to basically take away calls coming into our contact center, right? That's the directive stuff. And then the more transformative stuff might be, let's build a lab to go and explore what all these tools do and mean for us. And then we'll maybe take a more VC funding type approach, which is let's find some bets to put on Horizon 3. Let's start investing in Horizon 2, and let's just keep cracking through what we need to do in Horizon 1. And I think they are very different approaches.
I sometimes wonder, and it always pains me to wonder, why does it take distress for organizations to change? Maybe it is an imperative. Maybe that's the something that binds everyone to want to change. But the one thing I see out of COVID, and I kind of hoping this continues, and I do want to see something positive coming out of COVID, is that when everybody has had to work together, they now do. And silos that were previously in place were broken down. Decisions have been pushed down to the pizza teams, to the small size teams who are working cross-functionally, cross-department with one imperative, which is to keep the business to survive. I think organizations are caring as well, and people are seeing that. They're less focused on the number of hours that people are doing during the day, and they're focused on business outcomes, which led me to a conversation, actually, is it the CEO who transforms an organization? Ultimately, I think the answer is yes. He or she is ultimately accountable, and someone needs to own it. Otherwise, if everyone's accountable, you know the story yourself, Chris, no one's accountable. But of an awful empathy that says that, we're dealing with people here because people transform businesses, not technology. And therefore, should we start to see HR leaders been moved into the position of CEOs, or should we be seeing HR running transformation programs because people are at the center of them, be them the employees or customers or anyone else? It'll be interesting to see how organizations actually organize themselves to transform and change without imperative, but just because they know they need to stay hungry in this world. I use the phrase, and it's not my phrase, by the way, it's digital Darwinism. What we're now seeing is organizations that have adapted to the digital world in advance of COVID are thriving and surviving. Yep. And those that haven't are sadly going to perish. And I don't wish that in anyone, by the way. But I just wonder if organizations have now seen that anything can happen. I don't think digital is going to disappear. And therefore, will we get into a cycle of constant iteration, constant experimentation, constant digitization with everyone working together going forward? Or do you see organizations going back to the way they always behaved and hoping COVID finishes soon so they can get back to inverted commas normal?
Yeah, I think, as one of our colleagues has said, this is the world's longest running, biggest HR experiment. I think my personal view is what we are seeing is like a sprint. Everyone went home, everyone got adapted to this new world. Everything's confusing. We've been in enough sprints to know that they're this kind of pressurized situation that you've got a bunch of really smart people together solving a problem. We've been doing that now for nearly a year, and I think the difference is between a sprint and this is people are tired, right? People are tired, they're burned out, they want things to go back to when it was easy. They could go to an office, they could park their car, they could, it's just the routine has completely been broken, and we still haven't quite got that routine back. And I think critically, go back to my sprint analogy, what we'll see, my assumption is what we'll see is actually good leaders will recognize that it's not go back and it's not stay where you are. There were these moments where actually the team really got together around problems. they were able to manage it virtually. So we can blast through critical problems that come up far more agilely than we could before, mentally. I mean, not just technically or process wise, but people are equipped to do that now because they've been doing it for so long. But I think it works in short bursts of energy that will enable people to radically tackle this stuff, whether at home or in the office. I think it did something to everyone mentally, and it changed the way we think about problems, changed the way we think about how we approach things. It took us a year to get there. I think some people will just want to go back to the old way, but I think there is this contingent now, these clusters across the organization that say, I really like what I'm doing. I really like how this worked. I liked the uncomfort and the white space and the territory that brought with it. I would like to keep doing that, but maybe not for a year. Maybe let's do that for a couple of weeks at a time, get that thing done, call it a sprint, a solutioning sprint or whatever. Then we go back and then we execute some of that, and then we come back and do it again. I really hope what people bring back is that agile mindset, agility into the corporate world, front, back, middle office, and bring in that agile way to approach solutions and problems, knowing that they've been doing it for a year with this uncomfort that COVID has brought. Just bringing some of that mentality back into the office, I think, is a real important thing. And I really hope that comes back with whatever normal looks like when we get back.
The new normal. It'll be interesting. I hope that is the case. I really do. I just wonder if there'll be certain greedy chief executives who are used to people burning the midnight oil, working at 100 miles an hour to get change happen. Will we accept, or will they accept when we go back to normal, that people cannot run at 100 miles an hour and gift organizations, those additional 2-3 hours a day where they were traveling and working through lunch to make things happen? It'll be interesting to watch. Maybe you and I'll come back in the next 12 months and have a conversation around what we saw post-COVID, God willing.
Yeah, I like that.
Chris, if people want to get to talk to you or want to get to talk to SYKES, how would they go about that?
Pretty easy. I'm on LinkedIn, or you can email me, chris.gayner@sykes, SYKES.com. And equally, sykes.com/digital is where SDS lives, or SYKES Digital Services. So check us out. Drop me a line. Happy for a chat.
Chris, thank you so much indeed today for coming on to Digital Bite Size. I wish you every success. That was one of the most interesting interviews I've come across. I love your thought processes. I'll be delighted to see the feedback in the interview. I wish you every success. Everyone else, be safe, be good, and we will talk soon at our next episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kieran.